Albert Einstein, though, there's a mind, right? He once said of Albert Schweitzer, he simply acted out of inner necessity.
Mm-mm.
And Schweitzer himself, he gave this guidance. I do not know your destiny, but I do know one thing. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve.
That really hits home, doesn't it? A powerful idea.
It really does. And if those words connect with you, well, you're definitely in the right place today. We're doing a deep dive into Albert Schweitzer, not just the famous humanitarian image.
You're right. There's so much more there.
Exactly. The complex person, celebrated musician, rigorous theologian, and a dedicated physician, all driven by that core principle, reverence for life.
And that principle, it wasn't just some abstract thought. It was, well, as the engine driving his entire life. It
Yeah.
made him make choices that, frankly, baffled a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely bewildering choices from a conventional view, but they created this incredible legacy. So to really get under the hood of that engine and understand what made his life, as he put it, my argument, we've gathered a stack of your sources.
Yeah, we've got quite a mix.
We do. We've got insights from medical journals talking about his actual hospital work. There's a review of a really key book looking into his philosophy. And this is interesting, even a Liberian postage stamp from his centenary.
Oh, wow. A visual marker.
Yeah, kind of a visual nod to Africa, the continent that was just so central to his story.
And these different sources, they let us go beyond that sort of standard biography. We can dig into the intellectual stuff behind the service, the personal sacrifices, and even the criticisms he faced, because he did face them.
Definitely. So our mission today, trace that remarkable sort of winding journey he took.
Right.
Dig into what reverence for life actually meant to him, philosophically. Look honestly at the day-to-day reality and the challenges of his work in Africa, including those criticisms.
Yep. Got to include those.
And see what concrete insights, what takeaways a life lived so intensely for others might offer you, the listener, today. Okay, let's unpack this thing.
Let's do it. Where do we start?
Okay, so background first. Schweitzer was born January 14th, 1875, Alsace, which was Germany then, now France, that whole complicated history.
Right, that region.
And he came from this family just steeped in, well, learning and music. His father was a Lutheran minister, lots of scholars, musicians in the family tree. And fascinating detail, his cousin was Jean-Paul Sartre.
Sartre. Really? Wow, that's quite the connection, quite the intellectual lineage there.
Isn't it? And what's really striking is how early the music came out. He was playing organ and piano seriously by age 9.
9. That's incredible.
And went on to get international recognition as an organist while still pretty young. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a major professional thing his whole life.
And he wasn't just playing, was he? He was a scholar of music, too.
Exactly. The sources mention a big book on organ building, construction, and of course his famous biography of Bach. He really dug deep into the musicology, the historical side of it.
Right. So you've got this high-level musical career blossoming. And at the same time, he's pursuing these really demanding academic paths.
Simultaneously, University of Strasbourg in 93, gets his philosophy doctorate at 99, then a theology teaching degree in 1900.
Wow. Okay.
So get this picture. By the time he's 29, he is a published, respected theologian. He's working at the Theological College. He's written The Quest to the Historical Jesus, which was a huge deal, really shook things up.
A landmark work, yeah.
Yeah.
Challenging the establishment view.
Big time. And he's also an internationally known concert organist and Bach expert. I mean, he'd already achieved
multiple lifetimes, really.
Before he was 30, which makes what happens next just almost unbelievable.
Yeah, this is the pivot, isn't it?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So back when he was 21, he makes this private resolution, a commitment to himself, that by the time he turned 30, he would dedicate his life to direct service, helping others.
And this wasn't just a sudden impulse.
No, the sources suggest it was very considered. He felt he'd been born to privilege and he owed something back. It was a response to that feeling.
That sense of obligation, that internal deadline. It tells you a lot about his character, doesn't it? Very deliberate.
Very. Then 1904 rolls around. He's 29, right on the edge of that self-imposed deadline. And he reads something.
The article
from the Paris Missionary Society, talking about the desperate, urgent need for doctors in Gabon, French colony in Africa.
And that just clicked for him.
Instantly. Your sources really emphasize this. It hit him like a thunderbolt. That inner necessity Einstein mentioned.
Right. This was it.
This was it. He decided, right then and there, to become a physician, to just drop everything else.
Which must have seemed completely mad to everyone around him. His family, his colleagues.
Oh, absolutely. Disbelief, disappointment, probably anger. He was throwing away these brilliant careers he'd built.
Takes incredible conviction to do that.
Totally. So 1905, age 30, he goes back to University of Strasbourg again, but this time for medical school, starting from square one.
And how did he pay for it? He wasn't exactly poor, but medical school.
He funded it himself with money from his organ concerts and lectures. That musical talent became the financial engine for his next life.
That's amazing. So the music enabled the medicine.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
8 years later, 1913, he graduates, specialized in tropical medicine and surgery.
Ready to go. But it wasn't smooth sailing with the missionary society, was it?
No, they were still hesitant. The sources say they worried about his liberal and radical theology. They thought he might stir things up, maybe attract other undesirables.
So how did he convince them?
Well, he'd married Helen Breslau by then, and the sources describe her as just remarkable, one of the very few people who really got what he was doing and fully supported it.
A true partner in it.
Absolutely. And they proposed funding the whole operation themselves for the first 2 years.
Oh, okay. Put their own money on the line.
Exactly. That did the trick. The society relented.
So March 1913, off they go.
Off they go. To Lambaréné, French Congo, to build a hospital from scratch.
And the beginnings were incredibly basic, right? The chicken coop story.
Yeah, the sources paint that picture vividly. Starting medical work, literally in a cleaned-out chicken coop. Talk about a contrast to his life in Europe.
A world away.
And that connection to Africa became so defining. It's even there on that Liberian stamp we mentioned, a symbol of that lifelong commitment.
But arriving wasn't the happy ending, was it? Challenges started almost immediately.
Oh, yeah, big time.
Yep.
Within a year of their arrival, World War I breaks out.
And they were German citizens.
In a French colony, suddenly they're enemy aliens.
Yeah.
Viewed with suspicion.
So what happened?
1917, they were arrested, interned as prisoners of war.
Wow.
Where? First in the Pyrenees Mountains, then later in a former mental institution at Saint-Rémy, which is kind of eerie, the same place Van Gogh had been confined.
Good grief. That must have been incredibly difficult.
No doubt. They were released early, though, and went back to Europe from 1918 to 1924, a forced break of about 6 years.
But he didn't just sit around, did he?
Not Schweitzer. He kept his medical skills sharp, took on pastoral duties, kept up the music, and crucially, he wrote a lot.
Reflecting on everything.
Exactly. This is when he published On the Edge of the Primeval Forest, based on that first African stint. Plus, major philosophical works like The Decay and Restoration of Civilization, and Ethics. He was processing it all.
Synthesizing the experience with the philosophy.
Right. Then, 1924, he goes back to Lambaréné. And this time, it was basically for the rest of his life.
But that return came at a real personal cost, didn't it, with Helene?
Yeah, that's the sad part of the story. Helene had contracted tuberculosis during their first stay in Africa. The sources say the climate, the conditions, were just too harsh for her health, so she couldn't return full-time with him. A really difficult separation.
That's heartbreaking. Did she ever go back?
She visited, I believe, but couldn't live there long-term. Their daughter, Rena, though, she eventually did move to Africa much later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she worked alongside him and ended up taking over the running of the mission. Kept it a family, in a way.
That's quite a commitment from her, too. Now, during this time, this period of reflection, that's when the famous philosophy really took shape.
Well, the core idea, the reverence for life, the actual moment of insight, happened earlier, back in Africa in 1915.
Oh, okay.
He was traveling up the Ogowé River, near Lambaréné. And the sources give us his own description. It's fantastic. From his book, Out of My Life and Thought.
What did he say?
He said he'd been struggling for months, trying to find this fundamental principle of ethics, filling notebooks. Then he writes, late on the third day, at the very moment when, at sunset, we were making our way through a herd of hippopotamuses, there flashed upon my mind, unforeseen and unsought, the phrase reverence for life. The iron door had yielded. The path in the thicket had become visible. Now I had found my way to the principle in which affirmation of the world and ethics are joined together.
Wow. Hippos at sunset. What an image for an epiphany.
Isn't it? Just clicks.
So what did reverence for life actually mean for him? What was the core idea?
Well, as the sources explain it, he felt most Western ethics were too narrow, too focused just on humans, anthropocentric.
Right, human-centered.
He argued real morality, true ethics, had to be bigger. It had to extend to all living things, everything.
So not just do good to other people.
No. It was about actively affirming life, respecting all creatures, trying to help life flourish and avoid harming it whatever you possibly could.
That's a much broader ethical demand.
Hugely broader. And it wasn't just abstract. He lived it. The sources are full of descriptions of the hospital grounds teeming with animals he cared for. Pelicans, chimps, antelopes, dogs, cats, just wandering around.
Which probably drove some people crazy.
Oh, I'm sure. But for him, it wasn't just being eccentric. It was the philosophy in action. Every day.
And his daughter, Rena, she felt Africa itself was key to this insight. Right?
Yeah, she's quoted saying something like, Africa gave him the idea that being immersed in that powerful, sometimes dangerous natural world was essential. He might not have found it sitting in his study in Europe.
Makes sense. It grounds the philosophy and experience. What about the man himself? What kind of personality comes through in the sources?
Complex, definitely. You get the famous image, hearty sense of humor, loved a good laugh, often at himself. That full-bodied laugh people mention.
The approachable side.
Yeah. But there was another side. The sources also talk about a temper.
Oh. How did that show?
Either this intimidating heavy silence or apparently sometimes verbal explosions if his orders were ignored or contradicted. He was clearly in charge and expected things done his way.
So not always the gentle saint figure.
No. And it seems people saw him differently. Short-term visitors, maybe some journalists, they sometimes found him aloof, maybe a bit preachy, didactic. They saw the administrator juggling everything.
Okay.
But people who stayed, who worked alongside him day in, day out, they often saw past that. They described someone incredibly disciplined, yes, demanding, but also profoundly caring underneath it all, really dedicated to every single patient, every creature.
And the workload must have been immense.
Unbelievable. One source lists his roles: doctor and surgeon in the hospital, pastor of a congregation, administrator of a village, superintendent of buildings and grounds, writer of scholarly books, commentator on contemporary history, musician, host to countless visitors.
Good grief. How did one person do all that?
It's hard to imagine. Now, we have to talk about the criticisms, too, because the sources bring them up. He was widely admired, obviously, but not universally, especially later on.
Right. What were the main criticisms?
Several things. That his medical practices didn't always keep up with the latest developments back in Europe, that the hospital conditions, well, they were pretty basic.
The sanitation issues, the animals everywhere.
Exactly. Primitive, some called it. Unsanitary by modern Western hospital standards at the time. And also that he could be autocratic, sort of dictatorial in how he ran the place.
How do the sources handle these criticisms? Do they dismiss them?
No, not really. They seem to present them as, valid observations from people who were there. They highlight that tension, his vision, his mission, versus the very tough realities of working in that remote place with limited funds.
And the sheer scale of it, you mentioned it grew huge.
It did. Eventually, 70 buildings, capacity for 500 patients.
Yeah.
So the sources sort of acknowledge his standards, the context, but also let the criticism stand as part of the complex picture. Shows that even a life like his wasn't simple or perfect.
Adds that layer of realism, which is important. Okay, so despite the complexities, the legacy is huge.
Undeniable. Across so many areas. Healing, philosophy, activism. He got tons of awards, honorary doctorates, the Goethe Prize, Britain's Order of Merit.
And the big one, the Nobel Peace Prize.
Nobel Peace Prize, yeah. Awarded in '52, but he was too busy at the hospital, couldn't actually go get it until 1954.
Priorities. And what does he do with the prize money?
Put it straight back into the hospital, funded a whole new wing specifically for leprosy patients.
Wow.
Yeah. And apparently he joked, dark humor again, now everyone is going to want to have leprosy.
Oh my. Classic Schweitzer, maybe.
Seems like it. And his fame, it just grew and grew. Lambaréné became this pilgrimage site almost. Volunteers, admirers, journalists pouring in.
Did he mind that? The attention.
He seems to have welcomed it, in a way, because he wanted people to see the philosophy in action. He wanted them to witness reverence for life being lived out day by day. It reinforced his whole point.
My life is my argument.
That's the one. Such a powerful statement. It wasn't about talk. It was about the doing. The living was the proof.
And that example, it clearly inspired others. You mentioned Tom Dooley.
Yeah, the sources explicitly mention Dr. Tom Dooley's hospital work in Laos being directly inspired by Schweitzer, and countless other clinics, orphanages, hospitals around the world drew inspiration from his model. The ripple effect was enormous.
And his influence wasn't just in medicine or philosophy. He became a major voice in social activism too, didn't he?
Huge, particularly on nuclear weapons. The sources really highlight his work campaigning against atmospheric nuclear testing.
This was in the 50s. Cold War era.
Exactly. He used his global platform, his scientific understanding, to warn about the dangers of radioactive fallout. He pushed hard for complete nuclear disarmament.
Which makes total sense, coming from his reverence for life philosophy. It's the ultimate threat to life.
Absolutely. It was a direct application of his core belief to the biggest stage imaginable. In his Nobel speech, The Problem of Peace, he didn't pull any punches. He said, what really matters is that we should all of us realize that we are guilty of inhumanity, a real challenge to the world.
A call for collective moral responsibility.
Yes. And Norman Cousins, who knew him and wrote about him, summed up his impact really well in one of the sources. He said Schweitzer's main achievement was, let me find the quote, he was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for a moral principle. He enabled men to discover mercy in themselves. He reached countless millions who never saw him, but who were able to identify themselves with him because of the invisible and splendid fact of his own identification with him.
That's powerful, that idea of identification. He made morality relatable somehow.
I think so. He lived out his own belief that a man's life should be the same as his thought. Principle and practice, completely interwoven. He passed away in 1965, age 90, right there at Lambaréné, buried near that river where he had his big insight.
A fitting end to an extraordinary life. So, if we boil it all down, what are the key takeaways, the big lessons from this deep dive?
Well, beyond just the amazing story, I think there's some powerful things for us. First, the incredible power of choosing service, consciously deciding to dedicate yourself.
Right, that deliberate choice.
Then the deep fulfillment that can come from truly aligning what you believe with what you do, day in, day out, even when it's incredibly hard.
Living your argument.
Living your argument, exactly. And the importance of that wider ethical view that reverence for life shouldn't just stop with humans.
Expanding our circle of compassion.
Yeah. And maybe just the fundamental idea that dedicated work itself, whatever it is you do, can be a source of real meaning and purpose.
He wasn't telling everyone to move to Africa.
Not at all. There's that quote attributed to him, may everyone have his or her own Lambaréné.
Find your own way to serve.
Exactly. It's an invitation, really, for you, the listener, to find your place, your path, your work, whatever it is where you can live out your deepest principles, tap into that inner necessity he felt, and find your own fulfillment through that kind of dedication, wherever you are.
It's about translating principle into action in your own context.
Right. So building on that idea and thinking about his activism, his concern for the whole planet with the nuclear issue, here's a final thought for you to chew on.
Okay.
We're facing massive global challenges today, right? Climate change, huge social inequalities, ethical dilemmas with new technologies, just enormous complex stuff. Daunting.
So how might Schweitzer's principle of reverence for life, if we really broaden it to include humanity's collective future, the health of the planet itself, how might that guide our actions now? And maybe more personally, what could finding your own Lambaréné look like as a response to these modern challenges we all face?